and start the iTalk meeting. I'd like to welcome everybody to the September iTalk meeting. It's been 60 days. We got to take August off, so we're here to reconvene again. An unusual format. I guess it's not that unusual anymore, but I would like to thank staff for pulling this together. And for everyone who may have logged on or called in, thank you very much for attending. Before we begin the meeting, I'd like to welcome Francesca Webb to the meeting. Francesca has been with Sandag for several years and recently has been promoted to the position of clerk of the board. So I think Tessa got promoted to clerk of the board, correct? And Francesca is going to go ahead and help us. So welcome, Francesca. Can you tell me if we have a quorum or not to begin the meeting?
Yes, Chair, we do have a quorum.
Okay, well, thank you. I'd also like to let everyone know that we need to defer to our October meeting, item number 14, the Regional Bikeways Program Status Update and the City of San Diego Bikeway approvals and projects. Unfortunately, we just learned from the City of San Diego, one of their staff members that was scheduled to present the project passed away unexpectedly. So we'd like to send our sincerest condolences to Mr. Edric Durango's family and to his colleagues at the city. As you may recall, virtual meeting procedures, we have a slightly new process. So I'd like to ask Ariana Zerneden, our iTalk staff liaison, to please go over the basic instructions again for both committee members who might like to speak today. So Ariana.
Thank you, Chair Kenny. I'd like to remind our members and the members of the public that our process for both member and public comments, what that is, the members will be using their cameras and we will be taking live comments. Members are asked to turn on their cameras when they have a comment or question, and then Chair Michael Kenny will recognize you. As noted on the cover page of today's meeting agenda, in addition to the email comments, the public may also provide live comments during today's meeting. And in order to provide live comments, you may register for the Zoom platform on the link that is provided on the cover page of your agenda today. You can join the meeting by clicking on Join Webinar link that is provided in the confirmation email that you would receive upon registering. And then when public comments are called for on an item, click on the raise hand icon in the Zoom control. You'll be called on by the name you registered with and may provide comments for the allotted time. There is no need to mute your microphone. The organizers will unmute you when you are called upon. And the instructions for providing live comments are also on the bottom of the cover page of today's meeting agenda, which can be accessed from the homepage of Sandag's website at www.sandag.org. And all comments, whether emailed or live, will be made a part of today's meeting record. So, thank you.
All right, well, thank you very much, Ariana. All right, with that, let's start with agenda item number 1, which is the approval of the July meeting minutes. I hope all of my fellow committee members had a chance to review. Do we have any comments on the minutes?
Move to approve.
Okay. Thank you, Stuart. We have a
Chair,
motion.
we need to take the public comments before we vote, but I do not see any public comments at this time.
Well done. I will make it a point to check with you before we have staff or committee member discussion for the public comment. So, all right, with that said, Stuart has made a motion. Do we have a second?
I second.
Thank you, Sonny. We have a second. Francesca, if you could go ahead and take the vote.
Yes, Chair. For the member for right-of-way acquisition, Jeff Schneider.
Abstain since I was not there.
Thank you. For licensed civil traffic engineer, Chair Kenny.
Approve.
For contractor construction, Brad Barnum. I believe Mr. Barnum is absent, so I'll move on. For biology environmental, Dustin Fuller.
Approve.
For finance and budgeting, Stuart Halpern.
Aye.
Licensed engineer, Les Hopper.
Approve.
And for CEO private sector, Sunny House.
Approved.
Thank you. And that item passes with 1 abstention.
All right. Well, thank you, Francesca. Okay, let's go ahead and
It was not an abstention, it was, they're not here, right?
Oh, I apologize. It was 1 absent, yes.
I think he said he might be a little late, so hopefully.
No,
Hopefully.
there was an abstention. This is Jeff Schneider. I abstained because I was not a member at the last meeting.
Yes, I apologize. First time clerking. I will get this together. Mr. Schneider abstained and Mr. Barnum is absent.
Perfect. Thank you very much. All right, so we'll go on to item number 2, which is public comment for any comments that are not related to items that are on the agenda today. Francesca, do we have anybody wishing to speak on items that are not on the agenda?
No, Chair, I don't see any hands raised at this time.
Thank you very much. With that, we'll go ahead and move on to the body of the agenda. But before I do that, I'd like to introduce our new member, Jeff Schneider. This is his first meeting, so welcome. He's been appointed to serve in the role of the real estate and land economics expert position. He's been a real estate lawyer, real estate executive, real estate professor, broker, and Jeff, care to elaborate on that for us? Maybe introduce yourself?
Yes, I don't have much to elaborate. I don't see myself here. Hopefully I'm showing up for you. I'm honored to serve along. I'm honored to serve alongside all of you and look forward to learning from you and with you for the next months and years. So thank you.
Perfect. Well, welcome. All right, so item number 3 is the director's report. And do we have the director to present today?
Yep, Mr. Chairman, this is Jim Linthicum. Hassan can't attend, and so he asked me to fill in for him. So I'd like to give his report.
Well, thank you for filling in, sir.
Yes.
Feel free to give the report.
You know, just another couple of words on Francesca. You know, she has been with us for a while, since 2012. She's worked in our editorial services department, and she's an expert editor, and she's got a lot of experience with the agenda process. And one of her career objectives has been to be a clerk of the board. So we're confident she's going to do a great job for us. And we'll send out we'll send out her contact information so you can make sure that you have contact with her, just like you always did with Tessa. So Tessa has moved on. Tessa did a great job as clerk, as both a full-time clerk for about the past year or so, and then as one of a few clerks that we had for many, many years prior to that. She did a great job working with each of you. And she has moved on. She has now accepted the job as the senior executive assistant to Hassan, our executive director. We also wish her the best. Just one other update we want to give you, and that is a legislative update. The legislature adjourned. And we're very, very pleased that a bill was sent to the governor that will streamline the CEQA process for our airport project. It's AB 2731, and that's what we call the Central Mobility Hub, which is at the old NAVWAR facility, well, the current NAVWAR facility. And the governor has until the end of this year to sign all bills, sign or veto all bills. And so in addition to that, you may be aware that our board deals with something called RHNA, the Regional Housing Needs Assessment. And the board's direction was to pursue an extension for each of our cities to submit and get approval for their housing requirements, or their housing plan for how they're going to meet the state requirements. And they had asked for that. They had asked us to try to see if we could work with the legislature, and the governor's office didn't get an extension. And we have not been successful at that so far, but we're still working. They don't think that's needed right now, but we're still working on it. And what we are doing is we were successful in securing a grant called a Local Early Action Planning Grants. And those grants will just help each of the cities applied for money where they can help with their housing and improve their plans. So I know this isn't something that ITALC deals with, but it is something that's very, very big going on with our board of directors. So, Mr. Chairman, that concludes my report, unless you have other questions or follow-ups for me.
Thank you, Jim. I don't have any questions myself. To my fellow committee members, do you have any questions for Mr. Lincecum? We're hearing none. Well, thank you very much for the report, and we'll move on to the consent
Chair, we do
calendar.
need to take public comments for this item also, but I don't see any hands raised at this time.
Well done again. All right, thank you. So for the consent calendar, all items on the consent calendar are information-only items, but if a member of the committee would like to pull an item off the consent agenda for comments or a question, they're welcome to. Please use your camera to let me know that you might want to do that. Any interest in Ms. House?
Yes, I do have a comment in general on the smart growth incentive and a couple of questions. So I'd like to have that discussed.
Okay, and that is item number
4.
4. So we'll pull item number 4 from the consent calendar. We'll take the remaining items if there are no other questions on those items and receive and file them, and go ahead and revisit item number 4 for discussion. Do you have questions for staff?
Well, I have a comment on the way the report is providing status. It's really difficult to know really what the status is, because every comment is project is making timely progress. But then we see delays, and there's several that are years of delays and things like that. If our job is to be oversight and we need to know really what the status is there a way this reporting can be done so we know what the progress is? Is it 0% complete? Is it 50% complete? Why are they asking for delays? You know, I see several that are months or years of delays. And they're large dollar amounts that are just being allocated but not spent. So can you explain what can be done unless % complete was something that was discussed earlier and rejected? So.
That's a good question. I can add a performance measure in the table in attachment 1. I could figure out how to do the how to add, like you said, like a % done or whatever. But the 12 projects that are behind right now have asked for up to 1-year extensions on COVID-related items, such as supply chain. Inability to obtain materials due to supply chain disruption. Public outreach right now is a big challenge for a lot of them. I would say the majority of the smart growth planning projects, they are very heavily, public outreach is a very huge part of that. So a lot of them are struggling right now with, how to go about that. Okay. And also the ones that are construction due to distance, 6 feet apart distancing, a lot of the construction sites are a little bit slower right now. So yeah, but that is definitely a good suggestion. I can build something like that into the attachment table.
Whether even just to know where the status, is it in planning, is it in design, is it in construction? It really doesn't say, because every one of them says project.
Well, if you look at, on the table that I provide, there are categories.
Excuse me,
and
Tracy,
let me take a look
Tracy,
here.
can I interrupt for just a second?
Yes.
This question might be for Francesca, but can you share the table just very quickly so we can follow along with the dialogue? It's in the agenda.
Correction, is that something you might be able to assist with?
I can share. This is Ariana. I should be.
Okay, sorry.
That makes it easier. This will stop other screen sharing. Is that okay? Yes. Okay.
So
it's on page 12, PDF page 12 of the agenda package.
I'm not sure.
number 5, Yeah, in that report, Escondido.
Let's see if this works. Can you see it now?
Yes. Ariana, can you go to number 5?
The Escondido Transit Center.
Right. So
Right.
their first extension was 32 months.
Okay. So let me, if I may say, you asked about the categories. It's a capital. If it's categories in the description as a capital, that's a construction project.
Okay.
And then planning. And then we have also non-planning part of the active transportation.
Okay.
And that is planning, but it could also be a campaign, a biking campaign, which we call EEA, Educational Awareness Project.
Okay. I didn't know what capital meant. So is that something that can at least be maybe included in the legend? Sure. Yeah, that would help.
Or I can, yeah, definitely. I could either change the capital and just say construction project. Would that help?
Yes, and also if there's a column that you can say, okay, this is 50% complete or whatever, but those are like, those are the ones that I'm questioning. The other one is number 7, and it says Amendment 1, Amendment 2. Is there an Amendment 12? Is that?
No, Amendment 1 was for a 12-month extension, and then they went and had another amendment, and that was approved by the Regional Planning Committee for another 12-month extension. And now due to COVID, they've done another 6-month.
So is that Amendment 3 for 6 months?
So yes, it's Amendment 3. That's a typo. Sorry, I apologize for that.
Okay. Yeah, so yeah, thank you for considering a little bit of a, more update on these. I would appreciate it.
Oh, no problem. I welcome the suggestion. That was a great one.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Anything else I can help?
Well, stand by. So Ariana, it looks like this was formatted for 8.5 by 11, probably when we were printing these and hand delivering them or still mailing them out. Maybe it would just be a little bit easier to go to 11 by 17 format for these tables. Is that doable in this day and age, or is that going to be?
Yes,
It just sounds, yeah. It looks like the information is there, and it just got added to the last columns. We were out of columns, so maybe just expanding the format would be helpful in that regard. And you can add those columns that way.
And just on record, this could apply to the other reports that we've seen, even though we've said consent. Anything where we can at least know what the progress is, instead of just project is making progress, would be very helpful.
Sure, we can work with staff to look at all the quarterly grant programs and see how we can make improvements.
Thank you.
Any further comment from the committee on item number 4? Stuart. Mr. Halpern.
Thanks. I just got one question. Where we say projects placed on the watch list of a grantee is not making timely progress, I tried to read Board Policy 35 and it was a bit hard to get through. So my question is the definition of not making timely progress mean that there are actually some milestones that have been missed, or is that a more subjective judgment?
Yes, Policy 35 does spell out the milestones for the project, and that's mainly getting a construction awarded. So there's two major milestones. And so but being on the watch list are projects that the grantee is not making timely progress, meaning they haven't met those milestones, and they're not asking for, they're not working with me to remedy that situation. So in other words, if I do get quarterly progress reports from them, and so I see where they are on their projects, and if they're not making their milestones and they haven't been in touch with me, then they'll be on the watch list.
Got it. So the watch list is in effect not so much as they're at risk of being late or behind, that they're pretty much already behind because they're missing milestones. Is that a fair summarization?
Yeah, that's a fair sum. Yeah. Mhm.
Great, thank you.
Any other committee members? All right, Tracy, thank you very much for your explanations. Sunny, any action that you'd like to initiate on the item? It was a consent calendar item, so we can just receive and file it.
Yes, no action required. So.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll go ahead and receive and file item number 4 as well, and move on to the next item on the agenda, which is item number 8. And I believe we have a presentation on this, and then at the conclusion of the presentation, we'll take public comments. So, Mr. Needham.
Yes. So this is your regular update that we provide on Transportation Committee and Board of Directors TransNet items that they've reviewed. And the last time we provided this update was at your July 8th meeting, since you were dark in August. On July 10th, you may recall that ITALC Chair Michael Kenny presented your 2020 annual report to the Board of Directors. And then also in July, the board approved a memorandum of agreement with NCTD and also with the City of Imperial Beach to participate in SANDAG's commercial paper program. And you reviewed that at your July meeting as well. In July and August, the Transportation Committee and the board received presentations on the comprehensive multimodal corridor plans that you saw at your July meeting. They also received presentations on both what we are learning from COVID and how it could impact transportation planning in the San Diego region, as well as a presentation on the vision for the 2021 regional plan, and staff anticipates bringing these as a combined item to your October meeting. And then last week, the Transportation Committee recommended that the board adopt the 2018 RTIP Amendment number 14. That's also on your agenda today, and that is scheduled for board consideration later this month. And then I also just want to take a moment to welcome and introduce Dawn Batiste. She's my new boss, and she's no stranger to you all, as she has presented at ITALC previously, and she has worked with many of you. She's our new Strategic Capital Funding and ITALC Program Manager, and she's going to be leading and providing guidance to our team. So we are very happy to have her, and we welcome her.
Thank you very much, Ariana. I thought I'd share my screen for a second to show my face.
All right, well, welcome, welcome. Francesca, do we have any public comment on this item?
Chair, I see no hands raised at this time.
All right, thank you very much. So we will take it back to the committee for discussion. Are there any questions for staff from the committee? Seeing none. Any discussion on the item from the committee members? All right, well, Ariana, thank you very much again. We will go ahead and receive and file that information item as well and move on to the next agenda item, number 9.
So item number 9 is your fiscal year 2018 TransNet Triennial Performance Audit status. We bring regular updates to you approximately twice a year on the status of our implementation efforts toward implementing recommendations from your performance audits. And for this one, it's the one that you conducted in fiscal year 2018. For the benefit of our new members, I'll go ahead and provide a brief background. The ITALC conducts performance audits of all TransNet recipients every 3 years to improve the effectiveness and the accountability of the TransNet program. The ITALC hires its own performance auditor to conduct these audits. The fiscal year 2018 audit was the 4th of these audits, and recently the ITALC began its 5th audit, which is the fiscal year 2021 performance audit, and that is currently underway. And the FY18 audit included 26 recommendations, which are shown in attachment 1 to your report. Since the last update that we provided back in April, we've noted that staff considers 15 of the 26 recommendations to be completed in addition to 2 partial recommendations. And historically, for prior audits, most if not all recommendations would have been implemented by the time the next audit begins. However, many of the recommendations from your 4th audit will be influenced by both the adoption of the 2021 regional plan, which is scheduled for fall 21, and then also by the current effort underway to establish a transportation performance framework. And so for that reason, ITALC acknowledged that future audits would be the ones to take an in-depth review of the progress in implementing recommendations from your 4th audit. The attachment in your report includes a summary of the progress made since the last update, As mentioned, we're showing more recommendations as completed this time around, and staff considers some of these to be more process-driven types of recommendations where the process has been implemented, but staff will continue to look for opportunities for continuous improvement. The summary also shows proposed ITAC member leads in track changes where we've had new members join us, in addition to a more detailed status of what's been accomplished since the last update, including links to relevant reports, next steps toward implementation, and by when we anticipate completing the recommendation. And then at yesterday's ITAC chair and vice chair briefing, we did receive further input to add estimated target completion dates as a separate column, which we can certainly incorporate for your next progress update. And staff is seeking ITAC concurrence on the completion status noted, as well as input on the proposed ITAC member leads. Also recently, we received a request to hold a working session between ITAC and staff leads for each recommendation. The current audit subcommittee was established to work on the FY21 audit, which is outside of the scope of the FY18 audit subcommittee. So we do have directors that are overseeing the implementation for each audit recommendation available today on the line to answer specific questions as necessary. But alternatively, if the ITAC wishes with direction today, it could use its existing subcommittee or establish a new subcommittee from its membership to address this request. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you, Ariana. Before we get to questions, are there any public comments on this issue, Francesca?
I do not see any hands raised at this time.
Thank you very much. So let's take it back to the committee. Are there any questions for staff from committee members?
I do have a question and then a comment.
Ms. House?
So thank you everyone for making progress on this. I know there's a lot of other priorities in place. I noticed that in reporting on progress, several of the items really are dependent on item 5 or subcomponents of item 5. Can you explain or have someone explain what's going on with that particular item, and just elaborate a little bit more?
Yes, so item 5 is the recommendation, and we do have staff on the line that can chime in as well. But item 5 talks about establishing a comprehensive performance framework by setting targets to better measure performance against TransNet Extension Ordinance goals. And so we have made a lot of progress in implementing this recommendation. The team has hired a consultant, and we did present an item to the ITAC, I think about a year ago or so, where we laid out the plan to hire a consultant to help us with the implementation efforts under this recommendation. And in terms of next steps, my understanding is that we plan to come back to ITAC sometime this fall, winter timeframe to provide kind of a vision for what this transportation performance framework might look like, because the deliverable from the consultant is due sometime soon in the next couple of months. And so we would be in a position to share a little bit more about what the consultants have found and what the next steps might be after we come back.
Okay. As a member of the 2021 Triennial Audit Committee, I am aware of the focus of that audit and know that there's several new recommendations will be forthcoming after all of this is done by next June. So we have about 10 months to hopefully get as much of this audit done as possible. And I also know that it's, we get a quarterly update, and there's really not a lot of time in an ITAC meeting for us to sit down and discuss the details of how things are going. And I really see a need within this next 12 months to have more focus on getting as many of these recommendations completed as possible. And I also see that ITAC can play a role in that by having maybe some of the committee members in a subcommittee role to sit with SANDAG folks and go through everything, on a maybe regular basis, whether it's monthly or whatever. And I know that that's not the purview of the new audit committee for 2021. So my recommendation would be to have a subcommittee, either the members of the previous 2018, I know there's been some changes, or a brand new subcommittee that will sit with SANDAG staff regularly and go through the process and understand and maybe provide support, guidance, at least a discussion, so that we get as much of this done as possible. I really don't want this to continue on too far beyond 2021 when we're going to focus on the next audit. So my motion is to create either a subcommittee or continue with the previous 2018 committee with new members to oversee this process in a little bit more detailed way.
Okay. Before I call for a second to the motion, let me check with other committee members to see if there's discussion on the issue that needs to go on. So thank you, Sunny. Stuart, you were on the 2018 triennial report subcommittee, were you not?
Yes.
So, so you've been following along with the recommendations?
Yeah, so is your question as to whether we have comments on Sunny's proposal, or were you wanting to take other comments?
We'll take other comments before we give her an opportunity to benefit from your comments and maybe revise her motion. So let's finish up on comments from members before we delve into it.
Because
Sunny, I guess that's up to you. We can call for a second, vote on the motion, or continue discussion.
Well, I welcome the discussion. Just go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So Stuart, it's a general discussion about the issue.
Well, I had a comment about a different item. So if you want to focus the conversation on the motion, I can defer my comments which relate to item 24.
Yeah,
All right.
just go ahead and finish, I guess, the discussion with this motion.
I just picked on you, Stuart, because you were on I think you're the only one that is on the chair on the board now who is.
Well, Dustin, if Dustin's on the line, he actually chaired that subcommittee.
Oh. All right, well, he's next then.
I understand that sometimes, progress seems slow. I think the current subcommittee focused on this triennial performance audit would not be the appropriate forum, because that's the focus of that committee really needs to be making sure we've got the upcoming audit organized appropriately. As to whether others, want to be involved in a separate subcommittee on tracking performance, I suppose that's up to other members. Personally, I like the fact that the review of accomplishments and open items is being done at full ITOC committees for sake of transparency, but that doesn't mean that there couldn't be a subcommittee focused on it as well.
Thank you. For my benefit, can you tell me who was on the 2018 and who's on the 2021 subcommittees, please?
Yes, of course. For the current subcommittee, we have chairing the subcommittee, Brad Barnum, and we have Stuart Halpern, and we have Sunny House, and we also have Tracy Drager in a non-voting capacity. And then for the FY18 audit, chairing the subcommittee was Dustin Fuller. We had Stuart Halpern, and then memory is failing me on the other member. It would have been Tracy Drager as well, but I don't know if Brad Barnum is on the line. Was it Brad Barnum?
I think it was Brad. Dustin, do you remember?
No, I wasn't. Can you all see me?
Yes.
Yes.
No, I came in late. No, I wasn't on last year's, Ariana.
Okay, apologies that I don't recall, but if all the members are present now, so if it wasn't one of them, then it's somebody who's not with us anymore on the iTalk. Apologies.
Very true.
Fair enough. Yeah, thank you. Dustin, you had been on the committee. You're not on the 2021 committee. Presumably, the 2021 committee wouldn't be populating this subcommittee to follow through on the 2018. I think that's the point of the extras committee. What are your thoughts on how we could track these? Should we free up the current committee to just focus on 2021 issues? Do we need a subcommittee to track the 2018 recommendations? What do you think would be a good way to handle it?
I wouldn't use the 2021 committee for 2018 tracking and follow up. As I recall, a lot of these items were kind of bigger picture, and we weren't expecting them to be turned around really, really quick. So asking that they come back to the committee every so often was one of the requests that we had made. If this committee now feels that there needs to be closer tracking, that is, of course, our prerogative, and I don't disagree with it, but defer to everybody else as to whether or not that's the route they'd like to go.
Brad, comments?
I agree. I mean, I don't think we should spend time on the current group doing that. I just
want to clarify, my motion was to either create a separate subcommittee or have the 2018 subcommittee continue with perhaps a new member. I totally agree that the 2021 audit committee should not necessarily be doing the 2018 follow-up.
Well, would you consider a friendly modification to your motion in that we lost one of the members from the 2018 committee and Stuart was already on the 20? I don't think we're going to be able to get that 2018 subcommittee together.
Then the motion is to create a new subcommittee to help SANDAG staff with implementation of the 2018 audit recommendation.
Gotcha. Les, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I agree with you, Sonny, and thanks for bringing this up. I spent some time over the weekend digging into this as well as other items, and I'm coming from a view of a new member, you know, even newer than Sonny. So there's a lot of catching up, and I've been looking at this from a perspective of somebody from the outside trying to read through these documents and understand, and I'm having a hard time keeping up and understanding exactly, you know, and reading all of these columns, what's complete, you know, other than there's a checkbox that says complete, but other items say ongoing, and I'd like to understand better what ongoing means and where they are exactly, and you know, I'm reading it and I'm having a hard time. So if someone from the public is looking at this stuff from the first time, I think they'd really find it difficult. So I agree. I think a subcommittee to help out on that would be wonderful.
Thank you, Les.
And
Jeff?
I'd even volunteer.
Sorry. Oh, there we go. So that's the other side of the coin, right? If Sonny's motion is successful, then we're immediately going to ask for volunteers. So bear that in mind. Jeff, you're brand new, but you're welcome to comment.
My initial reaction, without any, you know, out of my ignorance and lack of experience, is going to Stuart's transparency comment that maybe you have this committee, maybe it's a short ad hoc committee to help work with staff to generate the kind of data that you guys are talking about that we're not getting, you know, the detail, as opposed to a committee whose job it is to do what I think we were all responsible for, which is reviewing the progress on all those projects.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. We did get some information from council. We might want to consider an ad hoc committee as opposed to a subcommittee, and that we get a little bit more flexibility as an ad hoc committee. Brown Act has some restrictions. may or may not apply here. If this is the type of committee that's simply following along instead of taking action, maybe an ad hoc committee would be a better format for us.
Mr. Chairman, on that, as long as your record makes it clear that this is temporary in nature, then you're okay to vote on it, create an ad hoc subcommittee, and you would fit within that definition of the Brown Act. But just make that clearly a part of the record.
Thank you, sir. All right, so let's come back to the motion. Well, I guess before we come back to the motion, Ariana, so what kind of time commitment would you envision this ad hoc committee to be? Is this going to be a half hour before the meeting? I mean, I guess it could be as long as we want it, but what would be enough of a forum for staff to present?
To the ad hoc subcommittee?
Yeah, so I guess our options are to continue to bring it back to the general meeting or create an ad hoc committee. So I'm just trying to gauge, how much of an extra effort are we taking on?
It's hard to say, but I think I would look to the subcommittee to maybe let us know a little bit more about what they have in mind. Maybe there are specific recommendations that they want to take a deeper dive into, and maybe others not so much. So without really knowing the details, past subcommittees maybe have spent an hour or two, maybe a few months. So yeah, I'm not.
I think, Mr. Chair, I think the subcommittee can decide how they're going to move forward. The point is that, and we're not taking away the reporting to the committee. That's still happening on a quarterly basis, but it's going to be more detailed discussions and support and help and just, even the format of this report is very hard to read. Just ideas about what we can do to improve this process and continue to maintain focus. Maybe it's just a monthly meeting for an hour or two. I'm not suggesting a lot of engagement. I'm just suggesting that it makes things a little bit more streamlined and helps the process move along so that we can, by hopefully in 10 months or maybe a little bit longer, but at least we are working towards implementation and completion.
Thank you for the clarification. Another friendly amendment, would you consider an ad hoc committee instead of a subcommittee?
Absolutely.
A temporary ad hoc committee. All right, there's a motion on the floor. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Les. We have a motion and a second. Before we call for the vote, Ariana, do we need to set up the committee within the same action?
Yeah, either way, it could be, 2 actions or just 1 action so that staff knows which ITALC members to work with. And it can be no more than 3 in order to remain compliant with Brown Act provisions. No more than 3
Okay.
voting members.
Sunny, can we do that? Well, I guess we have a second now. I forget how to do this. Sunny, would you be okay with putting the members or the committee together as part of the motion?
Yes, I think it'll make sense to do that right now. So.
Okay. Do we have any volunteers?
Less.
I'll be happy to volunteer, and Les, you seconded it, so come on.
Yeah, I'm stuck.
All right, we can move forward with 2. Is that correct, Ariana?
Yes, absolutely. So it
It's
would
more
be, so I'm clear. Is it Sunny House, Les Hopper, and Michael Kenny, or only Sunny House and Les Hopper?
No, Mike.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but Sunny is going to focus on the 2021 triennial report, and the 2018 temporary ad hoc committee will be Les and myself.
Understood.
I would like to volunteer. It doesn't, I don't think, I mean, it's my time commitment. If I want to
Okay.
commit to being involved, you know, that's my decision. And I still do my job with the 2021 subcommittee. So, and this way, there's a little bit of a, you know, continuity between the two as well. So.
Well, thank you. All right, so we have a motion to form a temporary ad hoc subcommittee to monitor the progress of the results of the 2008 or the recommendations of the 2018 triennial report. That committee will be Les Hopper, myself, and Sunny House, Vice Chair House. Francesca, if you could call for the vote, please.
Thank you, Chair. For right-of-way acquisition, Jeff Schneider.
Aye. Aye.
Thank you. For licensed civil traffic engineer, Chair Kenny.
Approve.
Thank you. For contractor construction, Brad Barnum.
Aye.
Thank you. For biology environmental, Dustin Fuller.
Aye.
Thank you. For finance and budgeting, Stuart Halpern.
Aye.
Thank you. For licensed engineer, Les Hopper.
Aye.
Thank you. And for CEO private sector, Vice Chair House.
Approved.
Thank you. That motion passes unanimously.
Thank you all.
All right, thank you. So let's move on to item number 10. Mr. Lane, Brian Lane, I understand we have a presentation.
Excuse me, Mike,
hang on.
I still had a comment on item 24, if I could.
Oh, I apologize, Stuart. Yes, if we could, you could share, please.
Okay, great, thanks. So I don't know if folks have a opportunity to look at item 24 individually, if we could throw that up on the screen. But, you know, I have great sympathy for how demanding it is for staff to put together all the information that we require from them, as well as the challenge of dealing with so many constituencies who use all these reports. But with great respect, I'd like to suggest that item 24 needs to be viewed as an ongoing process and not a completed process. I think Sunny's and Les's comments today on a couple of the items, you know, this one in particular is a great example of why that's the case. And I don't know if it's a little bit hard to read on the screen, but item 24 speaks to the presentation of the meeting materials and the meeting packages. So I'm wondering two things. First, if it's not already being done, Ariana, I'm wondering if there could be some annual training for staff in what I would call writing for decision makers. For anyone who has responsibility for writing these presentation materials. And then secondly, if staff could recommend the most effective mechanism for user feedback, unless the preferred mechanism is for staff getting called out in public during the presentations as to, you know, where users feel like we need to have some improvement.
Yes, my understanding is we do have some training already available to staff, both in-house and outside training. To your comment about writing for decision makers, definitely, but and also regarding the mechanics for user feedback. So, so are you referring to other than at the meeting? So other than when the presentation is.
I guess that's what I'm asking is if, first of all, if people, you know, enjoy being called out in the public way at the meeting, or if there's, you know, I mean, I'm open to suggestion. I don't really care how it gets done. I think, you know, just to use this presentation itself, and, you know, I'm not trying to slam the person who put it together, but we've had both Sunny and Les, you know, comment about how it was sort of difficult to really get to the most important information. I mean, for me personally, I would have organized the tables by having the items which are not completed listed first, so they really stand out, because that's what we're going to be talking about. And so that's the type of thing that I'm referring to in terms of, staff trying to understand how to actually write for decision makers as opposed to just write for completeness of information being presented. And I don't mean to be harsh in saying that. I think it's something that really is just not a one-time fix where we've reformatted something. Hopefully that resonates with everyone and you get what I'm talking about.
Yes, and I think this goes to the theme of ongoing and continuous improvements. So definitely this is something we can take a look at. Maybe staff can work with our communications folks and others that are well versed in making sure that and how we write for decision makers. So yes, we can definitely take a look at this and maybe bring back a different, perhaps for this one, for example, your subcommittee could take a look, and I think there were comments earlier, how the information is presented and to make it more digestible. So we can work on that for sure.
Yeah, and this is one, if as part of that process with the communication consultants or staff team, if anybody's looking for feedback, I'm happy to receive a call and pass on thoughts and suggestions. But I think it would be much appreciated by all of the users of this information. And again, I know how much time everybody puts into putting this all together. And so I think everybody shares the goal of wanting it to be as impactful as possible.
And I think this is something that for this particular case, the ad hoc committee can help with that anyway, as far as making this report a little bit more reader friendly and focus on the right things as well. So, but Stuart, we welcome taking your suggestions as well. So.
Hi, Mr. Chair.
Jose?
Yes, yeah, I just wanted to maybe add a little bit to what Ariana said. So, Stuart, thank you for your comments. Obviously, we're always looking for better ways of communicating to decision makers. So obviously your feedback is welcome, and we'll work with the committee. One thing where in the area of an ongoing status, that's something that for me it's maybe a little bit frustrating in the sense that we're never done. Obviously, we're always looking for improvements, and so when we say that we're ongoing, somebody that's coming cold or whatever may look at this and say, well, what does that mean? Does that mean that, have you even started? Have you completed it? Have you done, any improvements since the last time that this was looked at? So I would look to the committee to help us communicate that, yes, some improvements have been made since the last time that the recommendation was made, but that doesn't mean that we're done. We're always looking for improvements, such as what you're referring to right now. Since the recommendation on reports was made, the reports themselves have been simplified. Does that mean that they're being effective? Well, obviously we're hearing from members of the committee that they could be improved upon. And so obviously we're going to be taking a look at that and trying to make those better. So it's just a way of communicating, the status of the recommendations to provide a true picture of the efforts that have been made. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nuncio. Any other comments from staff before we bring it back to committee? I'll just invite it if there are any other comments. No, thank you. All right, so for the committee members, Stuart, thank you for your additional comments. Are there any other comments from committee members on item number 9 before we move on? Hearing none. All right, thank you very much. We have we had a motion passed, so we'll close this item and we'll move on to item number 10, and that's a presentation by Mr. Lane.
Hi, good morning. Thank you, Chair Kenny, and good morning. My name is Brian Lane. I'm a senior transit planner with Sandag. The purpose of this report is to provide information on one of the 2018 audit recommendations. To help provide a little context for the newer members, I'll give a brief update on the pertinent section of the TransNet extension ordinance and the auditor's recommendation. I'll then provide an update on the discussions with the transit operator staff and a subcommittee of ITALC members, and then the conclusions raised from those discussions. So Section 4C of the ordinance provides for roughly 13% of the revenues to go to the two transit operators for operating and capital improvements, transit fare discounts for seniors and individuals with disabilities, and for specialized transportation services. Section 4C5 includes a requirement that the transit agencies keep cost increases in check within the increases in the consumer price index. If the operators cannot do so, they could possibly not receive any additional funding over the year before. However, the ordinance does allow for the operators to request the approval of the commission for exclusions of some costs they have little to no control over, such as increases in the cost for fuel or new state or federal mandates. They may also request the approval of the commission to calculate the requirement as an average over 3 years to smooth out the variances. The auditors noted that the SANDAG board may want to revisit this section of the ordinance to be more relevant with the economic realities faced by the operators. Possibilities for us to look at included setting a threshold for a not to exceed limit, allowing for a wider variance in cost increases, allowing cost exclusions that can be supported, or apply the thresholds at the operator level rather than by individual route. In March 2019, I provided a report to the ITALC, and a subcommittee was appointed to further discuss and come up with a recommendation. SANDAG staff, the transit operators, finance staff, and the subcommittee met a few times shortly after to discuss these recommendations and develop options to potentially bring to the ITALC for an ordinance amendment. The ITALC subcommittee members asked many questions and had us return with data to support or refute the various proposals on the table. I'm not going to bore you with the details of the data, but ultimately the subcommittee and staff determined that there's no compelling justification to implement amendments to the ordinance at this time. The subcommittee felt it was best to not try and list all the possible exclusions and include them in an amendment, but rather have the transit operators bring those requests and let the committee opine on the reasonableness of those. While there were 3 original members on the ITALC subcommittee, Dick Fortman has since left the ITALC, but Stuart Halpern and Tracy Drager are still here and can help provide context on why they felt best for the transit operators to continue to bring to the ITALC their specific requests for certain cost exclusions. So that concludes staff's report, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right, well, thank you very much for the report. Before we bring it up to committee, are there any members of the public who would like to speak on this issue, Francesca?
Thank you, Chair. I don't see any hands raised at this time.
Thank you very much. So let's bring it up to committee for discussion. Are there any questions for staff? I guess questions before discussion. Any questions for staff?
Mr. Chair, Brad Barnum. Brian, with COVID and the lack of the less ridership has resulted in less transit operations in general. Is that impacting anything related to salaries, operating costs, things like that? Because we're seeing less buses, I believe, and less trains, for instance. I know trains for sure on the coaster.
Right, definitely. They've decreased their cost through the time by cutting services in some parts. They did try to keep, a good backbone of service to ensure that those who do need transit have transit and can get to work. But yeah, so we'll be seeing the results of the last, 6-9 months come up in the data. So I imagine when they, bring their next annual item to ITALC with their numbers that we're going to see the results of that. Now they did receive federal stimulus funds as well. So all that's going to get mixed in, and, their cost and against revenues and all that will be different. But, for our specialized transportation grant program, that was on the consent, that's a similar kind of a thing that a lot of our grantees had to cut services. And so we've cut them a whole lot of slack on their reporting and monitoring, knowing that, this has had a big impact. So our quarterly updates for that has changed, and we imagine the transit operators data is going to change as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee members? Just open for discussion. So this is listed as a discussion possible action committee, or I'm sorry, issue. So is there any interest in taking action on this? I understand we had some recommendations from a subcommittee and staff on how to handle the issue. We could take issue, we could support them, or we could thank the gentleman and receive and file it and take no action. Yeah, I'm in general support of the actions of the subcommittee and staff, so I wouldn't be proposing any motion myself to take action other than that. Verbally, thank you for your efforts and offer my general support, but my thought would be to receive and file it unless other committee members have a different opinion.
Sounds good.
Okay, well, sir, thank you very much for your presentation. That concludes item number 10. We're going to go ahead and move on to item number 11, the RTIP amendment. If Mr. Radcliffe's available, sir, you're up.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members of the ITALK. I'm here today with the proposed final of Amendment 14 to the 2018 Regional Transportation Improvement Program, or RTIP. I'd like to start by providing a little context to this amendment for our newer ITALK members. The RTIP, the Regional Transportation Improvement Program, is the 5-year program of projects that implements the projects in the regional plan. Normally, we update this program every 2 years. The update requires that we evaluate the air quality impacts of the program. In February, we informed the ITALK that because of a ruling by the EPA, we would not be able to use our air quality model, so the state canceled the scheduled update. However, the TransNet Extension Ordinance requires that SANDAG prepare an update to the TransNet Program of Projects, or POP, which is programmed in the RTIP every 2 years. Therefore, to comply with the ordinance, we asked local agencies to update their program of projects for fiscal years 21 through 25 and to program it as an amendment to the 2018 RTIP. Amendment 14 reflects the programming of the 2020 TransNet Program of Projects, as well as the fiscal year 2021 SANDAG program budget. The ITALK is asked to review and discuss the projects in the proposed amendment, focusing their review on the TransNet funded projects. Attachment 1, which was included as a link in today's agenda, is the 2020 TransNet Program of Projects. Each agency has held a public hearing and submitted a resolution. This attachment is provided to illustrate all 5 years of the POP. This attachment is necessary because we are programming this POP as an amendment to the 2018 RTIP rather than an RTIP update, and the current RTIP will only show the programming of the first 3 years, which are fiscal years 21 through 23. Attachment 2 on page 91 of the agenda is the summary of changes report showing the prior and revised project cost, the cost difference, and the percent change in each report, or sorry, each project. Attachment 3 on page 114 includes any changes made while the draft was out for public comment. Please note that none of the changes were due to comments from the public, rather the changes were made by the agencies themselves. In attachment 4, which was also provided as a link, you will find the changes proposed in the amendment, specifically for those funded with TransNet. For this amendment, and in order to reflect the 2 additional years of the 2020 TransNet Program of Projects, we added a column to the table for future years funding. There are some projects that have been added which only have funding in future years, which are currently listed for information only. Finally, attachment 5 presents the ITALK TransNet programming analysis, which summarizes how local agencies have programmed TransNet LSI funds. The Transportation Committee released the draft of this amendment for public comment and held a public hearing at the September 4th Transportation Committee meeting. No comments were received. That concludes my report, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, sir. Before we take any questions, are there any members of the public who would like to speak on this issue?
I don't see any hands raised at this time.
Thank you, Francesca. We will take it back to committee for questions for staff. Do you have any questions for staff?
Mike, I have a question.
Vice Chair House.
Richard, regarding attachment 5, where you show the cities that are, have not quite programmed to their percentage, what happens to that? Do they add on to the program later? How does that work?
I'm not exactly too sure what happens with whatever they're not using. Maybe someone else can answer that question.
Hi, Sunny. This is Sue Alpert. I'm the RTIP program manager. Yeah, so we ask the agencies, when we ask the agencies to program this, it was before the end of the fiscal year, and we asked them to estimate what their carryover amount was. After the fiscal year closed, we were able to provide a more accurate amount of that carryover, and so some cities underestimated and underprogrammed. We encourage them to make these corrections. This particular cycle, they'll probably be making the corrections in the next RTIP update, which we're going to be bringing in the fall. So that time they'll add additional funding. In fact, I even got an email this morning from a city asking, when can we do that? So they'll be working on that in September, and you'll be seeing the results of that possibly in December.
Okay. So because of that, for now, they're locked into these numbers until the next RTIP update happens. Is that how it works? Sue got frozen here.
You too, but we can't really force them.
I'm sorry, you got cut off. Can you repeat that?
I said we encourage them to program up to the 70% of their funding, but we can't.
Uh-oh, we lost. I think we lost him. Okay, what happened?
Yeah,
sorry, like everybody got lost there. I don't know if that
was This is Dustin. I got locked out and then it kicked back on.
Okay, I thought that was just me. That's
Okay,
good.
Sue, I'm sorry. Can you repeat it? We just couldn't.
Tracy, we're sorry about that.
Is this the iTalk meeting? I'm kidding.
Okay, everybody here? Yes.
I think so. Yeah, we've got just about.
I'm sorry. What I was trying to say is that we do encourage the cities to program up to the 70% or 75%, but we can't force them to really. So if a city isn't programming all of their funds, that's sort of where the iTalk comes in, and maybe they can call them and ask them to come in and explain why they're not doing that.
Okay. Thank you for the explanation.
Sure.
Thank you, Sue.
Hi, Chair. Can I just add a little bit?
Back to staff, Mr. Nuncio,
I just wanted to add to what Sue was saying. We can't force the local jurisdictions to program more, but this is actually one of the areas that I wanted to highlight that, the ITAC has, kind of brought to bear with local jurisdictions. This is an area that the ITAC several years ago, and many of you probably remember, Jonathan Tibbetts, he would essentially ask, this was like one of his favorite tables, and he would always go through it to make sure that the cities were programming their dollars, and if they weren't, he would ask, why not? They're getting the money, their streets don't look very good, they need to start using their money. And so this is something that the ITAC asked us to add sort of as a performance measure that the ITAC wanted to follow. And so we do that, but again, this is not something that we can force the agencies to do. Sometimes the agencies do have a good reason for not programming up to their available amount. Maybe they're saving up for a big project. And so we ask them, and right now we ask them through a letter to let us know why, just provide an explanation. In the past, the ITAC asked individual cities to send in their staff to provide a presentation and ask them questions. But there was recognition by the ITAC that it did present a bit of a just time commitment for the cities to come all the way down to downtown to make that presentation. But anyways, I just wanted to highlight this as one of the areas of influence of the ITAC with local jurisdictions.
Jose and Sue, this I haven't seen this much yellow quite a while, Jose. It's interesting. And are the letters usually attached to our agenda? I haven't looked. Are they there?
They're usually
I would
attached,
like
yes.
to, so there's two different items that we are talking about. So this is the RTIP item, but your next item, which includes the quarterly financials, does include those letters, and that is where you typically see those, and you also see that threshold that the ITAC helped to implement.
Thank you.
I do want to ask, what Jose mentioned as far as our influence, how does that get relayed to the cities then? I mean, if there, this is an amendment, so it's going in as record, and you have to go through another process to get these updated. So how do we influence that? Do we just tell SANDAC, go tell those cities to use it up, or what is the process? Because I agree. I mean, that's the whole purpose of this TransNet funding, is providing these dollars, and they should have some good reasons why they're not going to use it. Granted, if they have a big project that's coming up, that's wonderful. So we know what that reason is.
So yeah, so in the past, the way that it has been done, the ITAC has requested that staff from individual cities come in and make a presentation on, just their program overall, their plans to spend the TransNet funds, their priorities, things like that. It's gone, kind of taking it a level higher. Members of the ITAC have met with city council members to ask them what their take on the use and the priorities for TransNet funds are.
Right.
I'd like to add
more.
Sorry,
Oh, okay. So I just wanted to also mention that standing item on an annual basis on your agendas is to have the city of San Diego come in and talk about their capital improvement program streamlining efforts. That is a direct result of this effort. So you will see that on an upcoming agenda, I think in the next couple of months, but that is how you have, as a committee, helped to influence and work together with the city to help improve. And we have seen results there. So
yeah, it may have worked because they're 97%, but there's cities that are below 50. Go ahead, Sue, you had something to say.
I was just going to add that a request from the ITAC for an explanation to the city would carry a lot more weight than a request from me. So I appreciate the support of the ITAC.
Well,
Go
ahead. Sorry, I have a suggestion. I mean, I think it's important maybe to set some guidelines here for, when we want to see that information. Maybe if it's below a 50% utilization, the city should come and explain why. If it's between 50 and 100, a letter will would satisfy us. Just something to get the momentum going and get some accountability going with the cities.
Sunny, I had, so is everybody's AV stable at the moment?
Yeah.
Good. I think the issue, I was on the ITAC when this issue originally came up. There was a larger agency, couldn't get their audits done in 2011, and that went on for, I think, into 2013, and that was a requirement of getting funding. And it was a very big number. And that's why the ITAC chair at the time, honestly, got angry. And we invited the city to come in and explain why that was happening and get an explanation from them. And at least they understood that millions of dollars of improvements weren't getting done because of that. So it wasn't because of a certain percentage. It was a really big issue at the time. So I don't know that keeping track of it in the way that we are doing right now is, say, insufficient or not giving us the information we need. And when something really bad happens, then we invite staff or council or even city council to come in and explain why. We are a committee that recommends to the board. We don't have any authority ourselves, but there's certainly a desire on the agency's part to make sure that their efforts are understood at our level. So they're pretty responsive. Anyway, I wanted to share that because I was around when that occurred. I'm not adverse to some additional layer of analysis, but I think what we really are looking out for are those really big instances where money's being held for years, and avoiding those, and it's helping staff and the board avoid those.
Well, I guess I'm hearing something different. I don't know if you heard what Sue said. To me, if the ITAC has more authority or more power or more ability to convince these cities to spend the money, it doesn't hurt for us to at least hear from the cities why they're not. There's $43 million sitting on the table right now that is not being used. That could go back to the taxpayers and pay for improvements in their cities, and that's what they voted for. So I think that's really important for the cities to understand. And what's the harm of getting a letter from them when they're below 100%, or what's the harm of having, there are 3 cities here or 2 cities that are below 50%. And is Carlsbad, and I know we have a letter from Carlsbad, in a later agenda item, but there is also Imperial Beach, and I don't see any explanation of why they're only spending 38% of the money that they're allotted to. That's about $1 million, 1.7.
Well, Sunny, the footnote does indicate the reason that's showing up for Imperial Beach is because they recently had commercial paper approved, and that the payback for the commercial paper is generally withheld from the revenue, but right now it hasn't been factored into the revenue. So Imperial Beach held it back on purpose because they know they'll have to pay back.
Okay, and it looks like Carlsbad there's a note there too. It's too small. Okay, I see it. Yeah, but in any case, I just think, that's what we're here for, is to make everyone accountable and oversee the expenditure. So just thought it'd be nice for us to have that, kind of influence and utilize that authority a little bit. So.
Okay. Any other comments from committee members?
Yeah, Mike, I raised my hand. I don't know if you saw that, but.
Mr. Halpern?
Thanks. Yeah, so I somewhat facetiously moved that attachment 5 be renamed the Jonathan Tibbetts Memorial Attachment. As was pointed out, Jonathan was a prior ITAC member who really year after year kept on the city of San Diego, and as Sunny pointed out, they're now down to very reasonable balances. But the city of San Diego historically had $50 million-ish a year just sitting in that balance year after year after year. And I'd like to think that, largely Jonathan's efforts, and as was mentioned, included ITAC members going to talk to city council members, and a council member at the time, Todd Gloria, took this up as one of his issues to try to put pressure on the city, and they've really improved. The one thing that I think that there are lots of reasons why in any one particular year somebody can be, if you're looking at column D in attachment 5, where somebody can be in yellow. Maybe it's a little bit more concerning if somebody's a yellow both in column D and H, but I think the notion of, asking for reasons and, taking seriously the review of those reasons is an appropriate thing for this committee to be doing. With the memory of the city of San Diego in mind, the one thing I would ask, staff is, which would be helpful for at least for me as a committee member, if there's any way to, add some perspective as to whether a city is kind of a repeat offender, if you will. We're looking at these snapshots at a moment in time without the benefit of really knowing the extent to which, other than column H, which gets to that to some degree, somebody is persistently staying in the yellow columns, as again, the city of San Diego had been. So if my question makes sense for staff as to, other than the multi-year calculation in the right side of attachment 5, if there's any other way to try to make notation of a city that seems to be consistently under the benchmarks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we could look for a way to do that. Definitely, you know, we do prepare these reports for every formal amendment, so we can track who's not making corrections. And, you know, it would be helpful to have some guidelines to, you know, when we really want to pressure them, but it also, maybe you just want to track it for a little while until you determine that this is something you want to call out, and then we can put in a request to the city to.
Well, it seems to me that this is really going to be a case-by-case type situation, right? Because there are occasions when I know, maybe it was mentioned today, that sometimes the city is basically saving up for a big project. And so they will know in advance that there may be several years where they are going to be looking like they've underspent, in which case an arbitrary rule of if you're in the yellow for 2 years, you have to come down and explain may not necessarily be appropriate, because there's a really good explanation that will have been anticipated. But I think just you know, having the ability to have the awareness of, you know, who is continuing to show up in the yellow, so to speak, you know, might be helpful in giving us guidance as to when we need to try to be a little bit more assertive with a particular jurisdiction.
Okay, well, we could probably add that in the footnotes then by agency if this is a multiple offense, multiple year or amendment issue.
Thanks, that would be helpful. Appreciate it.
I have a question regarding
Vice
that.
Chair House.
So if that's the case, so when is the next time this document is going to get changed? I'm just trying to figure out how often we're going to see this. You know, how do we maintain or keep track of it based on the, you know, the frequency of this? Is this just anytime there's another amendment?
We prepare this document for formal amendments, and so we would show it to you every time we bring a formal amendment, but the next time you'll see it will be for the adoption of the 2021 RTIP, which again, will be in, you'll see the draft in December.
December, okay. All right, thank you.
Any other questions for staff from committee members? Okay, discussion, we talked all around it. This is a discussion only item, but we're always welcome to take action on an item if we choose. So is there any need from committee members to take action other than to receive and file?
Receive and file.
All right, well, we will thank staff for their presentation and receive and file item number 11. And we will move on to item number 12, which is a presentation of the quarterly reports. Andre, are you available?
Hello, can you hear me?
Oh, we can hear you fine, sir. Go ahead.
Hello, good morning, members of iTalk. I'm Marcus Pasquale. I'm an accountant here at Sandag, and I will be presenting item 12. I know the item says Andre, but he's going to let me present this item.
You're on there as well, sir. I guessed, and I guessed wrong. So thank you for
Yep. I'm having trouble with my my webcam right now. I'm not really sure what's wrong, but I hope you guys
we
are
see
okay.
your reports and we hear you fine. So let's give it a whirl.
Okay. All right. First off, I just want to welcome our new member, Jeffrey Schneider, to iTalk. We really appreciate you being here to serve. I'm going to be going over several attachments which reflect financial data through June 30th. And just as a brief background, this report is presented to the iTalk on a quarterly basis as a consent item, but we have gone ahead and changed it to information this quarter so that I can walk you through the report. So you're probably wondering how these attachments came to be and why we are reporting on them. And to answer that question, we put this report together based on recommendations from the past TransNet triennial performance audits, but also at the request of the iTalk. So depending on if we get new recommendations at the triennial audit, or if the iTalk deems it necessary to have another report, it may change in the future. But for now, we have the standard 7 attachments, which I will now go through. So I'm going to be referencing columns and figures as we go through the attachments. So I think it'll be very useful to have them in front of you.
Marcus, I hate to interrupt, but are you sharing your screen?
I am not.
I can do that, Marcus. This is Ariana. If that is helpful, I can share my screen.
Yes, that would be super helpful. Thank you, Ariana. Okay, can you go to attachment 2, Ariana? Okay. All right, so I am going to jump straight into attachments 2 through 7 without touching upon the first 2 pages, which are the overview page and the discussion memo page. I think it's best to skip over these pages since I will be touching upon those points as I walk you through the rest of the attachments. However, when this item is on consent, I think those 2 pages are useful if you just want a summary of the highlights instead of going through all the attachments. So starting on attachment 2, just as a fun fact, this report has actually been produced to the ITALK since the original ordinance. It is the oldest attachment. The report at its highest level of organization separates revenues from expenses, which are our TransNet allocations and fund disbursements. And on the left-hand side, you can see that it then goes on to sort them by program and recipient. And if you go to the local streets and roads program about halfway down the page to the left, no, you can stay on that page, Ariana. On the first page. Yep. So you can see local streets and roads program. And after that, you will see that is subgrouped according to local jurisdictions. So if we look at the first column under TransNet allocations or sales tax allocations, you can see that they are reported on a quarter, fiscal year, and cumulative program to date basis. To the right, we have other income, which would include interest income, TransNet 1, and our ARA swap, which was a sales tax swap for federal money with the local jurisdictions many years ago. And you can see the effects of that swap in the major corridor row under other income. And so it's hard to see fourth row down under other income, you can see the negative 176 million. That is negative since we gave up the sales tax to local jurisdictions. Moving on to the total allocation column, you can stay on that page, Ariana. I'll tell you when to go to the next page. So moving on to the total allocation column, this is just a sum formula for the sales tax allocation and other income. Now let's move on to the next big category, which is fund disbursements, which are subgrouped into 2 categories, program disbursements and debt service. Program costs will be vendor costs or invoices paid from the program for your main programs like ITALK, Bike, and Major Corridor. And for local street and road programs, those program disbursements would be comprised of payments to that jurisdiction. Moving on to the next column, our debt service disbursements will be your periodic interest and principal payments made from the issuance of our bonds. Let's go to the next page, Ariana. So halfway down to the page, let's move to the next category, which is commercial paper activity. To the left, we have a table that's titled Cumulative Commercial Paper Disbursements. And this is simply a snapshot of who's been in the commercial paper program. So you can see from here that the cities of Imperial Beach, La Mesa, Oceanside, and San Diego have all issued commercial paper in fiscal year 2020. And to the right, we have the table titled Commercial Paper Program Availability. So one difference between this table and the one to the left is that this table reflects principal payments. So the program to date figure will be their outstanding balance as of June 30th. Currently, our program has $100 million capacity to issue the commercial paper. So with all the recipients included, we will still have 43.7 million left over, which can be issued. Moving on to our last table on this page, we have the other activity table, which reflects a borrowing of money from the Major Corridor Program by the Major Corridor EMP program. According to the ordinance, Major Corridor is to advance fund the acquiring of land made by the EMP program, with the reason being is that it would be cheaper to acquire land today than in the future. Okay, moving on to the bond section right here. So this page summarizes the status of our different bond issuances. Looking at our issuances from 2008 to 2018, we have fully dispersed all project funds from those issuances, which is reflected by the inactivity in the fiscal year to date column. You will see an amount in the 2018 fiscal year to date column, and that's because we expended the last of that amount towards the beginning of fiscal year 20. And finally, this year we issued the 2020 bonds, which will be funding our bike program. You can see this fiscal year we have drawn about $14.1 million so far. I'd like to ask if there are any questions before I move on to the next attachment.
Thanks, Marcus. Any questions for Marcus so far from the committee? All right, Marcus, continue.
Should I save the questions until I'm done with all the attachments, or are you guys okay with asking me after each attachment?
Well, we're not a bashful group, but in general, we take your presentation, we get any public comment, and then we ask questions. But to the committee members, if you have questions, we can deviate from that to some extent. So.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, moving on to attachment 3. Attachment 3 is a summary of TransNet sales tax received. The upper portion compares estimates to actuals by fiscal year. This portion is really nice to have this time of year because we have a full year's worth of actual receipts to compare to. So in fiscal year 2020, you can see that we received $305 million of TransNet, which is 1.31% lower than our estimate and 2.07% lower than last year's actuals. The lower portion, if you can scroll down just a little, yep. The lower portion is a similar table, except we are now breaking it down by months. And since this is the Q4 report through June, you're going to see the same percentage decreases as the top portion. So again, through June, we can see that this fiscal year, our receipts are 1.31% lower than estimate and 2.07% lower than last year's actuals. So let's move on to attachment 4. So attachment 4 is summarizing our budgeted versus actual expenses for the ITALK program. I'm gonna go down to the net difference row, about halfway down the table. Again, this is really nice to have in Q4 because we have all of our expenses and revenues. So for FY20, it looks like we went a little over on our budget expenses by about $7,600, but we still have $47,000 left over when it's netted out with revenues that came in for the year. This $47,000 will carry over into future years, and you can see that $47,000 in the other available funds section towards the bottom of the table. Looking into future years, you'll see that in FY21, we are anticipating a $200,000 deficit, which would be attributed by the additional expense of the triennial performance audit that will be taking place. You can see in the other available funds section that negative 153K, which would indicate that we will be tapping into carryover amounts that year. So moving on to attachment 5. So attachment 5 is taking a look at our 30% maintenance portion for our street and road program. The ordinance states that no more than 30% may be spent for maintenance, so this attachment drills down on the figures that would comprise that 30%. So starting in column A, that would be the 30% of TransNet. Column B are our other funds, which again is our TransNet 1 interest earnings or the R swap, which I briefly went over in attachment 2. We get our total of column A and B and column C, which is our total allocation. Then we have column D, which are the dollars spent on maintenance. And then finally arriving at column E, which nets the allocated funds with the expenditures. So going back to the ordinance, how do we make sure that they are not spending more than the 30%? If you look at column E, there are no negative amounts, so that would indicate that all jurisdictions have not spent over 30% on maintenance. Moving on to column F, titled Cash Balances Available. So you may be wondering why column F does not match column E. The reason is that although maintenance is limited by 30%, congestion relief, which is the other 70%, is not limited. So these numbers in bold would indicate that that jurisdiction is spending more than 70% on congestion relief, which would mean they are tapping into the 30% allocated to maintenance. So I should also add that in addition to SANDAG internally monitoring the 30% rule, this is also part of the main compliance procedures done during the annual TransNet compliance audit. Let's move on to attachment 6. So attachment 6 summarizes our TransNet grant program balances. So here at SANDAG, you can see on the left-hand side, we have 4 grant programs, those being Active Transportation Grant Program, Smart Growth, Local EMP, and Senior Mini Grant. In column A, we have total revenues received for the grant, and in column B and C, we have the 2 types of revenues that comprise total revenue. These are non-grant, regional revenue, and awarded grant revenue. Non-grant revenue is going to be revenue received that is not awarded to grantees, but is instead reserved for a specific purpose related to the program. For instance, in the Active Transportation Grant Program, non-grant revenues may be reserved for regional bike paths and would not be awarded to grantees. We then have column D, which is our grant expenditures. And again, this would only be expended from awarded grant revenues in column C. We then arrive at column E, which is simply column C minus D to arrive at the unspent grant commitments. Footnotes also contain information about various cycles that are included in a program, as well as other information. So let's move on to attachment 7. Attachment 7 is titled Local Agency Street and Road Balances. And what this is an analysis of the TransNet funds allocated and spent for the local street and road program. So going from right to left in column A, we have cumulative TransNet actuals received through 6/30. Moving to the right, you'll see column B is supposed to be the estimated balance left to be allocated. But since this report is through the end of the fiscal year, there would be no need to provide estimates anymore. We would only estimate for amounts not received and are allocated for the remainder of the year. Column C is cumulative dispersed. Column D is the amount of TransNet balance we are holding at SANDAG. And column E is the amount held at the local agency to arrive at column F for the total cash balance. So before funds can be drawn by the cities, they must first be programmed into the Regional Transportation Improvement Program, or RTIP. Column H are those funds that have been programmed into the RTIP and are available to draw. Column I is going to be your funds that are available to the program, but have not been programmed into the RTIP. Finally, we arrive at what's really important, which is column J, which shows the actual percent spent at June 30th. The ITOC would like to see jurisdictions spending a 75% rate or more at the end of the year. So you can see the city of Carlsbad and Escondido are not meeting that. Attachments 7 and 8 are letters from those jurisdictions which addresses why they didn't meet the spending threshold this year. So with that, that would conclude my presentation. Are there any questions?
Marcus, well done. Before we get to questions, Francesca, are there any members of the public who would like to comment? Ariana, is there something wrong with my AV, or is maybe there's a challenge on?
Yeah, I see Francesca, you're muted. You're self-muted. Maybe she's having, there she is.
Sorry about that. I don't see any hands raised. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we'll bring it back to committee for questions for staff. Are there any questions for Mr. Pasquale?
Stuart and I have a question. Go ahead, Stuart.
You know what? I can't see everybody. I'm sorry, Stuart. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. With regard to attachment 5, this might be more appropriately a question for Ariana or Jose, but I know that the 10-year look back recommended that the board review the 70-30 congestion relief maintenance numbers. I'm just curious if there's been any ongoing discussion or if there's been some resolution on that.
That's a great question. So your item on the performance audit provided a status on that. Immediately after the FY18 performance audit was concluded, we did do a lot of work up front with the cities and counties Transportation Advisory Committee, for example, and others to take a look at that and see what revisions we might be able to make. And then what staff concluded really was that, you know, we were looking at, there were so many recommendations related to performance as part of your last audit, and you know, they were kind of at the sub-program level. And so what we realized is that we really needed to take a step back, and that is where that establishing the larger performance framework comes in, because a lot of those recommendations for, in this case, for example, the 70-30 for the local street and road sub-program tie back to that overall establishing a performance framework. So that is the status. So, and as I mentioned, the consultant will be providing a presentation that will show us what the vision going forward could potentially be for establishing that overall performance framework. And then we would be in a better position to begin addressing recommendations such as that local street and road 70-30 split recommendation. Does that help?
Yep, thanks.
Sunny, Vice Chair House.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Marcus, great job. That was a very good explanation. I could follow very easily, so thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question. Well, I'm noticing a trend with County of San Diego. A lot of money not spent. I also saw it in the RTIP amendment that they had like $14 million not spent. Is there an explanation, or does someone know why there's so much money in maintenance and other ways sitting on the table with the county?
Hey, Sunny, I can provide the information that I know. There's two things going on with the county. Number one, they have a large project, the Bradley Avenue overpass. And I know that they have a lot of large projects which have experienced a lot of delays. And so they're kind of always putting money aside to finish some of these projects. And as they got delayed, well, it kind of got pushed out more and more. The other thing is that during the 2018 RTIP update, they also underestimated their carryover amount. And they didn't go back to council to adjust that. They opted to wait for this current update. So they did track it very carefully, and they do now know how much carryover they have, so they'll be programming that.
Right. So when you say you have large projects, that's more on the the road improvement. But what about, if I'm not mistaken, under maintenance, they have 50 million unspent. So those are.
Well, the cities aren't required to spend their maintenance funds on maintenance. They can use them for capital and for improvements. So I think that generally the county does do that. They spend most of their funds on their capital project.
Okay, thank you.
Other members of the committee?
I have a question on attachment 5. I just want to understand how we could have a higher percentage spent than's available. I'm sorry, attachment 7. Sorry. So when we look at the actual percentage spent, how do we get 107%, for example, for Imperial Beach, or 196% for Del Mar? Where does that money come from?
Marcus, or I can help
Yeah.
answer.
So I asked, so the reason why is most likely because they are in a debt program. It exceeds their allocation because we dispersed debt proceeds to those jurisdictions. So the cumulative dispersed is going to include some of those proceeds.
Makes sense, thanks.
Yep.
Our commercial paper participants.
Correct.
Any other questions from the committee? So, let me just scroll through here. I got to figure out how to expand this so I can see. Oh, there we go. Can you go back to attachment 5, please? So the items in bold are in column F. Those are the agencies that have spent more than their 30% on maintenance proportional to what they spent on projects. Is that how I understand that?
The items in bold mean they are spending lower than the 30% of maintenance, but are spending more than 70% on congestion relief. So I guess you could say the items in bold mean they're using some of that maintenance money to spend more on congestion relief.
What's the obligation? That they spend more on congestion relief and not exceed the 30% for maintenance?
They, I don't, sorry, go ahead, Ariane.
Yeah, I can help with that. So the ordinance requires that no more than 30% be spent on maintenance, but they can spend 70 or more on the congestion relief eligible.
That's what I thought. Well,
and Mr. Chairman, maybe I can add just a couple more thoughts there. So you might recall that back, 14 years ago, 16 years ago, back when the ordinance was put together, the focus was on congestion relief.
Right.
And so, the local streets and roads bucket, the one that's going to the local jurisdictions, the ordinance was written in such a way that they could only use up to 30% for maintenance. And that's because the focus was to devote those funds for congestion relief. So they can actually spend more than the 70% on congestion relief. They can take it all the way up to 100%.
Unfortunately, the focus from the agency point of view is always on maintenance. So I'm sure that's why the ordinance was written that way. But the reason I bring it up is a few years back, Oceanside ran afoul of that, and they had to wait on some of their maintenance money till that balance got back in effect. And I seem to remember that was a pretty big deal. And I'm looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 agencies who are in that position now. Are these agencies gonna have to get that balance back before they're able to continue with spending maintenance money?
I think, and clarify me if I'm wrong, Marcus, but I think the bold is actually where they're spending more than 70% as allowable.
So that's good. So
Correct. Yeah, there's nothing
so
wrong
it's-
with.
1, 2,
Sorry.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So there's 10 that are not bold. Are those people out of whack with their required balance and are going to have to do something different than what they programmed to get that balance back in its right proportion?
Well, the items that are not bold are under the 30%. Everyone is under 30%.
Okay.
They
All right. So
haven't-
we're just showing who has spent more than 70% on
Correct.
congestion. So we're not showing the people who have spent more than they should on maintenance.
Right. If they have spent more than 30%, you would start to see negative numbers in the unspent total balance column E.
Okay. Well,
I just
we
wanted
could.
to add, Michael, the agencies they're supposed to ask for permission before they exceed that maintenance threshold of 30%. So you should never see a negative balance without already knowing about it.
Yeah, I think Oceanside just had a problem fall behind schedule.
Yeah.
So that was a problem. All right, so that number just doesn't show on this table, the people that are struggling for whatever reason with their allocation. Fair enough. That was one of my questions. And Escondido, they got to 74.5 of a target of 75%. Is that correct?
Which attachment are we referring to?
The yellow one. I think it's 6 or.
It's 7.
7. So 7. It's. I mean, I suppose you're in or you're out, right? So 74.5 is not 75.
Yeah, they were really close, but
okay.
Yeah, they barely missed it.
Okay. So there's only one agency that it's not obvious what's happening with.
Yeah, you could say that.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for helping me understand that. Are there any other comments from the members? All right, hearing none and recognizing that this is an information only item, I'll thank you very much for your very thorough report. And we'll move on to item number 13. Stephanie, are you ready to present? Oh, now we get Andre. All right, Andre, ready to go.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, and thank you. And just want to take a quick moment to thank Marcus. That's the first time he's presented to the ITALK committee, and I think he did a tremendous job. I know that when Lisa left a few years ago, Stuart was a little bit concerned, but I think you'll agree that Marcus did a fantastic job for us, so thank you. So similar to the report that Marcus just went through, this is also a quarterly report. It's a market update now. Typically, we'll go through a lot more of the bars and charts that are attached in the report, but I spent some time yesterday with our new committee member, Jeff, so I'll spare you with that. I think you've had enough numbers today. So I'll just kind of give you an update of the market, and then Stephanie will give you more of a look, a deeper dive into what's going on in the economic world. So the last time we actually presented this report to you was the March 31st report, which we presented on May 13th. And that was the first meeting that we had since the COVID pandemic had hit. Now, at that time, the stock market really was in disarray. We had just witnessed it crash by approximately 40%. The Federal Reserve jumped in and basically cut interest rates to zero. Then there was a mad rush for cash liquidity, sending short-term rates all the way up. For example, our commercial paper that trades in the 25 to 30 basis points would have gone up to 600 basis points. Fortunately for us, our duration was a little bit longer, so we missed that episode, so it didn't cost us anything, luckily. But in the meantime, the Federal Reserve has pumped liquidity into the markets. The federal government has passed 3 phases of stimulus, including the $2 trillion CARES Act. And so based on the liquidity, and stimulus, the markets have stabilized over the last quarter. In fact, the S&P and NASDAQ have notched all-time highs, which is a little head scratcher considering that COVID has not been, tapering off, or nor is there a bona fide vaccine. But I think what the market is doing is looking past 2020 and looking more into 2021 and 2022, that they think there's going to be a return to strong growth. So we'll keep our fingers crossed on that. So today I'll just basically take a brief overview of our debt and investments and how they've been impacted. And again, Stephanie will kind of look a little bit more into the economics of it. So, I mean, even with this difficult backdrop, I would say that generally there hasn't been any substantial changes to the debt portfolio. Because of the pandemic, the rating agencies that do their annual surveillance, typically at the end of each year, kind of did it a little bit earlier. The good news is that both S&P and Fitch came in and maintained their AAA rating on our senior lien. And again, just a reminder to the committee that only 5% of issuers throughout the country are AAA rated by both rating agencies. So we're able to maintain our pristine levels. They also came back with a stable rating, which is also something that we're very pleased about. Now, unfortunately, a lot of transit agencies throughout the country actually got downgraded because of, their revenues have been severely impacted. Our revenues have been somewhat impacted, but not like transit agencies and airport authorities that have seen their revenues drop off by as much as 80 and 90%. There were a few positives we can take out of this last quarter. Obviously, the COVID has been an awful situation, but there have been some positives that we were able to take out of it. First of all, like I mentioned, interest rates have dramatically decreased. And so we were able to restructure our 2019 escrow. That was the escrow that we set up late last year when we did a refunding of our 2012 and 2014 bonds. We're actually able to realize a $2 million savings after costs for that. So we got a check from the investment banking team of $2 million, which is great to have. As you're aware, we have a $537.5 million TIFIA loan that is going to be drawn on next year. Now, that was established back in 2017 when we thought that interest rates were low, but the 30-year Treasury was at 2.72% back then. Right now, the 30-year Treasury is in the 1.4% range. So we approached TIFIA back in March and asked them if we could potentially refinance. They said, nice try, but not really. There's never been a TIFIA loan that has been refinanced. There have been ones that have been refinanced under distressed circumstances, but they've never let a borrower who actually hasn't even borrowed against the TIFIA loan reduce their rates. But we were kind of insistent with them. And actually, just this last Friday, I'd like to say special thanks to Dawn, who worked tirelessly to update our letter of intent with the TIFIA office, who has agreed to actually lower our rates. And if they were to lower the rates where they are today, we expect we'll close this in approximately 2 months. The rate will be at approximately 1.4%, which would save us about $150+ million in interest rate costs over the next 30 years. Present value, that is about $120 million. So a significant amount of savings, and this is all because of what happened with COVID and the reduction in interest rates. We did refinance, as I mentioned, back in late December, our 2012 and 2014 bonds. Part of the 2014 bonds didn't make sense back then, but they do make sense today. Our debt policy says that we have to have at least a 3% net present value savings. And on these bonds, we have a potentially 15% net present value savings. Jeff, the newest member yesterday, asked the question, can you take advantage of the situation and issue more bonds since rates are so low? And that's another thing that I mentioned, that we are looking at our plan of finance pretty closely right now. And we may have an issuance about $100 million. We will know better in the next couple months as we finalize a plan of finance. It's always a balance of how much debt we have outstanding versus the amount of sales tax revenues. And we're still trying to get a better handle of our sales tax revenues. We have been getting numbers from the CDTFA recently that we're not that confident in. To give you an example, the first 2 months of the year, they actually showed our sales tax revenues going up by 1% over last year. Part of that is they put in a new reporting system a couple of years ago, and they really still haven't caught up with finalizing all the tax returns. So Ray Major will be coming back next month in October with Stephanie, hopefully giving the ITALC a update of our sales tax revenues. And at that time, hopefully we'll have a better feel for where we are. Again, the economic realities of what we're seeing today are not really matching up with our sales tax receipts, but Ray and Stephanie are currently taking a deeper dive with Muni Services, our sales tax consultants, so they'll come back with a report next month for you. One of the downsides to interest rates going down is our interest rate swaps, which are tied to what interest rates are in a negative position. Again, when we initiated the swap back in 2005, interest rates were a lot higher. And today, with them being next to nothing, our portfolio does show a negative position. However, the swaps are basically performing as intended. And so long as we don't decide to take out the swaps, if we wait till the very end, it won't cost us a penny. So the swaps are working, although when you look at our balance sheet right now, they do show a pretty significant loss, but we won't realize that if we are able to hold on. And again, there's no reason for us to get out of the swaps right now. Another maybe negative, obviously, looking at our investments. Currently, as of June 30th, we had $981 million in the bank. Prior quarter, we were earning 1.57%. This quarter, 1.16%. So obviously, as we see interest rates drop, we're going to see the investments drop too as far as the rate of return. And unfortunately, next quarter will probably be below 1%. I mean, it was just for 8 years, we were basically below that 1%. Over the last 3 or 4 years, we were able to get above 2%. But unfortunately, with interest rates going down to zero, we'll continue to see our returns as we get new fresh money in. We invest that, they'll be at a lot lower return. So with that, I'll just pause for a minute before I turn it over to Stephanie to see if you have any specific questions on our debt portfolio at this time.
All right, Andre, thank you very much for the presentation. Are there any questions from staff? I'm sorry, are there any questions from the committee for staff? Stuart.
Thanks, Mike, and congratulations, Andre, on getting the ratings reaffirmed as well as that TIFIA restructuring. On the debt service coverage, I'm curious that we're at I think it was 2.86 for the senior debt coverage. Do you happen to have some ballpark sense as to what an average AAA debt service coverage ratio would be? I mean, are we starting to get a little bit close, or is there still plenty room? And then the second question I have is my memory correct that we were anticipating 2021 to be the tightest coverage, and that we're hoping that the coverage should expand as we go forward, as revenues grow?
Yeah, that's correct, Stuart. So your first question, as far as a AAA, last quarter we were at 3 times. This quarter, you're right, we're at 2.86. So we've dropped some based on the little drop of the revenues. As far as what the rating agencies look at, I think a guide is approximately 2.5. Anything below that, I think you'd kind of, maybe a drop from that. But again, I think it's not just the coverage. There's a lot of other parameters that they look at. But I think our guide that we've always kind of tried to be cognizant of is at 2.5 level. So, our revenues would have to drop quite a bit to get there. So we're still comfortable that we'll be able to rate the AAA. Again, one of the things that we were surprised is the fact that they kept us at a stable outlook. Staff would not have been surprised if the rating agencies came up with a negative, because they did that across the board for a lot of other agencies. But I think for the reason that they did not for us is because we have a lot of other controls in place that they were comfortable that the drop that we had in revenues wasn't significant enough for a negative outcome. So, but they, there will be they are watching us. They'll be watching us updated sales tax. In fact, they've asked me to send them updates, on every 6 months as they come in. So they are watching us closely. You're correct as far as the coverage was getting very tight, as Jose would say. We're kind of trimming the trees, if you will, in this timeframe 2020, 2021. But once we pay off the bans, which is coming up here fairly shortly, we do get into about a 3 or 4 year breather before we have to start paying on the TIFIA loan. And so the tight coverage that we have was almost behind us. And we're well above a 1.0 coverage for the Major Corridors program at this point.
Great, thanks. And also, by the way, congratulations on being awarded Public Sector CFO of the Year.
I appreciate that. And I got a great team behind me that makes me look good.
Well done. All right. Any other questions on this portion of the presentation for Andre? Well, thank you for that, sir. I understand Stephanie has the remaining portion.
Yes, so I just want to make sure first that you can hear me.
I can hear you fine. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. And so you all have been staring at the first slide of my presentation for the past 15 minutes. So I guess you already know what's going to be covered here. So I'm going to start with the US and then I'll go into the San Diego economy. So up to the end of last year, we were in the longest expansion on record in the United States. And as an economist, I was wondering, and everyone else was wondering, what is going to be the trigger of the next recession. So now we know it was the safer at home policies that resulted from the COVID-19 pandemics. As a result of people staying at home and people being worried about catching the virus, US GDP has gone down by 5% annualized in the first quarter of the year and more than minus 30% annualized in the second quarter of the year. So this is what you can see on the upper left quadrant, and this is completely unprecedented. You can see in 2007, 2008, what we used to call the Great Recession. The numbers were not comparable to what we've seen in the second quarter this year. And in fact, you need to go back to the 30s to see such a contraction in a given quarter, like what happened in the second quarter of this year. So as a result, the annual forecast for the US has been revised down. So earlier this year, everyone was expecting a slowdown from 2.2 to 2%, and then further slowdown to 1.8% in 2021. So now the consensus is more like minus 6.5% GDP growth in calendar year 2020, and a rebound in 2021 to 3.2%, but still not enough to catch up with what we would have lost this year. Another way to look at how this crisis is exceptional is to look at the weekly unemployment claims. So this is what you can see on the bottom left. So this is every week, the number of people who are claiming unemployment benefits. At the worst of the crisis, toward the beginning of April, there were over 6 million people in the US every week claiming new unemployment benefits. Now, so we are like end of August, and the numbers have come down around 1 million every week, which is much better, but still remains very high, and it completely dwarfs what we saw during the Great Recession in 2008, 2009. One of the important things during this crisis is there has been very strong policy support. So Andre has already mentioned the decline in interest rates that was associated with the very, very expansionary monetary policy. The other part of the expansionary policy has been the fiscal stimulus, and especially the support to household income. So what you can see on the bottom right is income and consumption in the US month by month since the beginning of 2019. The purple bars are the real disposable income. And as you can see, it hasn't contracted that much during this crisis because people first got the stimulus check in starting mid-April, and then the expanded unemployment benefits. However, consumption, the blue bars, have contracted much more. And this is associated with different factors. The first one is the safer at home policy. So when you don't go out, you spend less. And the other thing is, people being worried about the future, whether they're going to be able to pay their rent, whether they're going to be able to keep their jobs. So even with the income support, people have been putting more money aside. And then and another factor is even when people are allowed to leave their home, they are still worried about catching the virus, so they still go out less. So now we're going to be moving to the next slide. I don't know who, okay, great. So that's, so now we're back in San Diego. So in line with what's happening at the US level, the forecast for the gross regional product in the region has been revised down substantially. So we are on, the consensus is about like -7% for the regional GDP this year and a recovery to 3.6 next year. The numbers are a bit larger than what you can see for the US because the San Diego economy on average is more exposed to one of the most affected sector, which is tourism. We're going to be going down to the unemployment, and we've been tracking unemployment on a weekly basis using some estimates that have been provided by Applied Geographic Solutions, which is a big data company based north of Los Angeles. And what it allows us to do is to kind of track the evolution of the unemployment on a weekly basis and at the zip code level. And as you can see from these estimates, it seems that the unemployment rate in the county has peaked to 25% at the worst of the crisis, end of May, just before the economy started to reopen. But then there has been some improvement since the economy reopened. However, it seems that, since mid-June, there hasn't been so much progress on the unemployment front. What you can see on the right of this chart is some example of the data that we've been following now. When you work on the local economies, usually you use annual data. There are very few monthly data. However, given the speed at which things were changing, we had to switch to some other types of data to be able to track the economy, and especially what's going on the spending front, because this is the major driver of our sales tax revenue. So we've been looking at two types of data. One of them is the mobility data. So the example here is the Google mobility data that's counting the visits to restaurants, cafes, shopping malls, and other entertainment places. And as you can see, as soon as the stay-home order was put in place, it completely dropped to it was down 60% from pre-COVID levels mid-April. And then it started to recover slowly. You can see that after the reopening was paused early July, following some new increase in COVID cases, the improvement has stalled completely. Another type of data we're looking at are the credit and debit card data. And the same thing, it's available on a weekly basis. And you can see more or less the same story. A sharp drop after the stay-home order, then some small improvement after people start to get the stimulus check and employment benefits with the reopening, and then kind of a pause starting at the end of June. What you're gonna see on the next slide, it's some more details about the weekly data we are tracking. So don't be scared. I'm just going to explain what you can see here, but what I want to say is one of the good things of this crisis is many big data providers have made some of their data easily accessible for free so that we can track what's going on in the economy. And these are data that are available for San Diego County or San Diego MSA on a weekly or daily basis. So we try to follow as much as we can. And here you just have the snapshot of the main ones we're looking at. And we find them very useful to get an idea of where the economy is and almost in real time. So I'm going to first start to give you an idea of the different type of indicators we're following. So this is going to be the first column on the left. And then I will try to give you a kind of an overview of what you can take from this chart. So the first row is unemployment, and it's the same data as the AGS data I showed you before. Then we also look at VMT. What's VMT is vehicle mile travel. So we are using the data from Caltrans to see how much people are driving in the county. Then we look at mobility data, and we look at two sets of mobility data. So the Google mobility data, which are the one we call overall mobility data that I presented earlier, retail and recreation and groceries and drugstores. But there is another source of mobility data that has been very useful for us is the data that has been put together by SafeGraph. And it's also based on tracking the phones and where people go. And the very interesting thing is they break it by types of activities. So you can see on a given day how many people go to supermarkets, to apparel stores, to car dealers, to hairdressers. And this is just an example of the very different categories you can follow. We also look at credit card spending. So there has been some efforts to put together easily accessible some credit card spending, both like the total and also by big types of expenditure, like in grocery stores or in accommodation and food services. And then at the very end, you can see what the category called others, which is where we track restaurants reservations. You know, when you book a restaurant using OpenTable, they save your data and they put it in a big spreadsheet where they compare the number of people booking restaurants table right now compared with a year ago. And there are also some people putting together data on small businesses. So how many are open? And for the ones who are open, do they see higher revenues than last year or lower revenue? So these are all the data we are following on a weekly basis, and just a small snapshot, there are even more. And so now if you move on the color columns, what you can see, so green is when, you know, this is pre-COVID, activity is like 100% normal at, you know, this is 100% of usual activity. And you can see that even before the stay-home order, we start moving in the yellows and orange. People start getting worried, so they already go a bit less to restaurants, hairdressers. And you see in dark green, the supermarket. This is when everyone rushed to Costco and Target and Walmart to pile up, thinking that this crisis is gonna get a bit nasty. And then very quickly, following the stay-home order, almost all the dimensions go into the red. So people not going out and not spending, except on grocery items. And then if you move forward, so it's kind of stayed that way until early May. And then you have the reopening of the economy. And slowly by slowly, you can see things were improving. So that's the big picture. If you look at this from far, you can see that from mid-May onwards, you gradually go into the orange and then the yellowish, depending on the item you're looking at. However, after early July, we can clearly see that things have stopped to improve. And I mean, the way I look at it is we are kind of stuck in the orange on most dimensions. There are a few categories that have been doing well through the crisis and still doing well now, like especially home and garden equipment. Everyone is at home, and that's one of the things they do is improving their homes. You can see that personal care services over the past 2 weeks have been seeing much more foot traffic thanks to the reopening and the abilities of these places to have outdoors operation. But overall, I mean, the situation is like between 10 and 20% lower than normal activity. And so this is where we are now. And so when I come back in 3 months, we can see whether we have moved more towards the green territory and how the economy is doing. But in any case, we feel that this type of data is very useful to check against, as Andre mentioned, the data we get from the CDTFA that doesn't necessarily meet what we observe that's going on right now in the economy. So now if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Well, thank you very much, Daphne, very thorough. Before we take it up to the committee members for questions and discussions, are there any comments from the general public? Francesca?
No, Chair, I don't see any hands raised at this time.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for Stephanie from the committee members?
I have a question.
Vice Chair House.
I thank you for the information. Could you put the information back up the screen? I'm just curious on the data that you presented. How does the deliveries, the door dashes and all those other things play into this? Because people are not, a lot of them are not going out. Do you distinguish, or do they distinguish that from the normal activities of people, or is there an increase? Just curious.
No, so they don't distinguish, and this is why we try to get both the foot traffic data. So the foot traffic data, it will tell you how many people are going to restaurants, including the people who are going to take your delivery. But we also look at the spending. So it's how much people do spend on restaurants, and whether it's by going there physically or just by ordering. The credit card spending on restaurants is going to be in the spending category. Okay. And the thing is, and it's very interesting because you can see that, habits have changed. They are very, I can point to a few things. So for instance, you would see that people spend more on grocery stores. However, they still go less than before to supermarkets. And what it means is instead of going 3 times to the grocery during the week, you're going to just go once and do a bigger shopping because you don't want to be exposed to the virus. So that's one of the things that has changed. Under restaurants, it's still much lower than a year ago. We track the foot traffic to restaurants, but also the restaurant reservation, and you can see this is extremely low, and also the spending on accommodation and food services, where you see a bit more of a pickup. Unfortunately, we can't really distinguish between accommodation and food services. Hopefully we will be able to do that at some point. There are plenty of interesting things you can see. For instance, people are going less to fitness rooms, but they are all buying fitness equipments for their homes. I don't know, bicycles have completely disappeared from the market. The same thing for weights. If you want to buy some weights to exercise at home, you can't find them. And that's what is great with this data is, this anecdotal evidence that you're going to read in the press, we see them in the data. So yeah.
Okay. And then the trend seems to be, I'm hearing news about vacancy rates at the hotels going up, and especially with the Labor Day weekend, which I know you don't have data yet. So projection wise, you see kind of continued, hopefully, improvement without another lockdown?
Well, so, you know, the things don't depend on us, and it really depends on the health situation. So, you know, things were improving, and end of June, we were quite optimistic about the future. Then suddenly we saw this spike in COVID cases, and then you see that first you have more restrictions on opening, and you also see, you know, people are also cautious. Not everyone, but some people are cautious, and they're going to go out less if they see that there is an increase in the virus circulation, whether they are told to do it or not. So these two factors are affecting the economy. And so for now, what I see in the trend is very limited improvement so far. So I'm very curious to see what the new data is gonna say, whether, you know, as we go into September and things seems to be improving, we see some improvement in the spending and the foot traffic. And, you know, we already based this diagnosis on the data. But it's very possible that we're gonna stay below normal times until we get a vaccine. Because until we get a vaccine, you will have a share of the population that's gonna be thinking, well, you know what, I don't want to catch this thing. And if you can afford to stay at home, you're gonna be staying at home.
Okay, thank you so much, Stephanie.
You're welcome.
Sunny, thanks. Any other comments from members or questions for staff members? And I have managed to lose control of the video feed. So if anyone like to comment, if you could speak up, please.
Yeah, I think Stuart Halpern has a comment. It looks like he has his hand raised, Chair Kenny.
All right, thank you very much for the help, Stuart.
Thanks, Mike. You know, first I just want to say that you know, communicating complex data is a difficult thing, and I think you guys are just doing a fabulous job. I mean, this chart in particular is really just outstanding to give somebody a very, very visual, quick understanding of a lot of really complex data. So this is really awesome. The question I have is, and you touched on this in your last comments, is the degree to which you're also overlaying some measures of infection rate as you know, in trying to understand what's going on. Because on the one hand, you've got the, as you show at the top of the chart, the actual degree of open versus closed segments of the economy. You know, that really, based on the governor's guidelines, that's really very sort of data driven. But then you've also got, as you alluded to, the perception, the behavioral aspect of this, which probably to some degree is tied to rates of infection or people's, you know, concerns about infection. So I was just wondering if you're also trying to relate that latter aspect of this into the data as well.
No, we haven't, but you're right. I think that now we have sufficient history, like, you know, a kind of a long time series where we could try to do some analysis and try to dig a bit into this link between spending and foot traffic on the one hand, and the number of COVID cases or the infection rate in the county. I think it has been done already at the national level, so we could look a bit into this.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks for the suggestion.
Any other questions for staff from the committee? Hearing none. Well, thank you very much. Both presentations were outstanding, always very interesting. For myself, quick question for Ariana. The 5 big moves, which one of the 5 is had the work from home component to it? Because if you look at that T line off the second line off that table, there's a 20% reduction in VMT right there. So is that you know, included in the 5 big moves?
Definitely and as I mentioned previously, and I don't know if we still have staff on the line, but I think at your October meeting, we anticipate bringing in an item, kind of what we've learned from COVID and how that will impact transportation for the future, and also the vision for the regional plan, which also incorporates the 5 big moves, which you've heard about previously. So, and definitely, I think teleworking it's definitely part of that presentation. So you will hear more about that at your next meeting.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much. That concludes one more item of business here. Francesca, would we have any other public speakers who, I guess a continuation of the previous set, or anybody who showed up during the meeting?
No, Chair, I don't have any public comments at this time.
Well, you did an outstanding job for your first meeting. I'm sorry I botched your introduction, but we certainly are glad you are here.
Thank you. I really appreciate the warm welcome and the patience from everyone while I get things figured out.
If you see Tessa in the hallway, wish her well. And
I
Jim,
sure will.
welcome. Ariana, when is our next meeting?
Our next meeting is October 14th, Wednesday
at
9:30 a.m.
All right, we will see you all then. I'd like to adjourn the meeting in memory of Edric Durango. I am very sorry for his loss, and our condolences to his friends and colleagues. So with that, the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.